thinking about this with Steve and talking about it, do we talk about faith in business? Do we talk about faith outside of business? And I really thought it would be more fun for me to talk about what I have done outside the business world rather than in the business world for this particular group. And this is a really good transition point for me. A number of you, I've just met this morning, are going through just what I'm going through. I retired as CEO at the end of last year and as chairman 3 weeks ago. So I am at a significant transition point in my own life, thinking about what do I do next and what do I now do with the free time that I have. Now, the free time isn't as much as I thought it would be, and because I've said yes to a few too many things already, but I am trying very much to be aware of all these different things that are tugging on you at this point in your life. Family clearly being one of those, and my children, are very important, and I want to spend more time with them, obviously, and more time with my wife, who's also still working full-time. She's the CEO of the Red Cross Metropolitan Chicago. But in any event, we're trying to figure out kind of where we go. And one thing that's important to both of us is what are some things that we can do together in our faith journey, and what might those be? So let's roll forward 30 years to 1990. I am now living in Chicago. I had been the CFO at Northwest Airlines and moved to Chicago. I met Tom Bentley about that same time. And I was working on an effort to buy United Airlines with a guy named Jerry Greenwald. Many of you may remember Jerry's name. He was at Chrysler and left Chrysler as their CFO to try to buy United on behalf of the employees of the company. I joined him in the effort to do that. We had to borrow about $4.5 billion at the time to take the company private. And you may remember there were two major stock market crashes, both related to the failure of United Airlines to go successful privately, and this was one of those two. But in any event, we were in the middle of working on this. I had joined a church in Evanston, Illinois, called First Presbyterian Church of Chicago, or First Presbyterian Church of Evanston. And the senior pastor there was a guy named David Hanley. And David and I became good friends. And one day as I was leaving the church, we were shaking hands, and he said, "John, there's something that I'd like to talk to you about. Could we have breakfast this week and chat about this?" And I said, "Sure, Dave, I'll call you and we'll pick a date." And for those of you who live in Chicago, and particularly the northern suburbs, you'll know that Walker Brothers is a great pancake house, and better than pancakes, they have great bacon, which is really why I like to go there. But in any event, Dave and I met at breakfast, and usually when Dave wanted to meet with me, it was about money. And there was a special project that he needed to have done, and he couldn't find the funding to do it. And it was, "Can you help me out a little bit, John, to get this done at the church?" And he mentioned that God had been leading him in a direction of starting a prison ministry at the church, which would be picking up young children in the city and taking them to visit their mothers in a state prison about 100 miles west of Chicago. And he had become convinced that the church should do this, and more so, God had convinced him that I should lead the effort to start this prison ministry at the church. And I thought, oh boy, I said, this is going to be a lot different than just writing a check. And so, checks I could write, and they were easy to do, but to actually spend time doing something was going to be a little different. So thought about it as he was speaking, and I said, "Dave, I think you've got a communication problem." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, you're clearly not hearing God correctly. God does not want me to lead this prison ministry effort and at the church. And he said, no, John, I think I'm hearing this thing the way it was told to me. And I said, listen, Dave, I'm just way too busy. You know, we're trying to do this little buyout thing right now. I'm working, 70, 80 hours a week. I'm in New York, every single week trying to raise the money, or in Tokyo. And, I've just got more important things to do. I'm too busy to do this. About a month later, the buyout effort failed. We were $500 million short of the $4.5 billion we needed to do the company, to buy the company. Big article in the Chicago Tribune. A day later, Dave Hanley calls me, and he said, John, it looks like God has freed up a little bit of your time. And I said, well, I don't know if he's freed it up to do what you want me to do, but I certainly have a little more time than I thought I had. The next Sunday in church, the most incredible thing, I think, that's ever happened to me in my life happened. It was the end of church. A woman came up to introduce herself to me. We'd never met before. In fact, I don't think I'd ever even seen her in church. She asked me if I was John Edwardson. I said I was. Her name was Janet Rogers. And she said, I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I was praying this week, and God told me your name in prayer and asked me to give you this note. And on the sheet of paper was simply Isaiah chapter 42, verses 6 and 7. So let me read them to you right now. I'm going to have to put my glasses on to do it. This is Isaiah talking about the fact that Jesus would be coming back. So part of this is clearly not related to the message she wanted to give me, but the second verse is, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness, and I will hold your hand. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the Gentiles, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from prison, those who sit in darkness in the prison house. So I thanked her for this, sheet of paper. Went home, called Dave up later in the afternoon and said, you set me up. and he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, this woman came up to greet me after church. Her name was Janet Rogers. And he said, John, I had nothing to do. I haven't asked Janet Rogers to talk to you. What did she talk to you about? And I told him about the scriptures that she had asked me to read. And he promised me that he had nothing to do with this. And he said, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I guess you and I are going to take a little trip to the inner city of Chicago, pick some kids up, and go to prison, because if I'm going to do it, you're going to do it with me. And we did that. So that began about an 8-year journey with 2 different families, and picking their children up. I told Don a number of the stories last evening about the experiences of driving into the inner city and picking these kids up on a Saturday morning and then taking them to visit their mother in prison. I thought it was going to be much different than it was. I looked at it as I could pick the kids up, do briefcase work while they were visiting with their mother. They would come back out of the prison. I didn't realize that I was going to have to go into the prison with them. I couldn't take my briefcase in, obviously. I was heavily frisked before you went in. And both women that I worked with over this period were in prison for murder, and it was just a really life-changing experience to sit in a prison cafeteria with prisoners and families all around, a little bit different group than I typically associated with. But a very leveling group, I have to tell you, because it was very clear to me that God loved all of the people in that room just as much as God loved me, and it was something that was important for me to learn, but also more important to think about the children. So, third inflection point, tithing being the first, prison ministry the second. 1998. I'm in a heated battle with the labor unions at United Airlines. The ESOP that we did in 1994 has been successful. Stock's gone from 22 to 120. Pilots and mechanics own 51% of the company, and it's worth over $4 billion at the time. But they're not real happy with the fact that their stock is worth $4 billion. They want more money right now. So we're in a huge battle over pay and work rules. And I will not give them the contract they wanted. They had veto power over the election of a CEO. They couldn't elect one, but they could veto someone that they didn't feel they could get along with. So we had 4 votes at the board level. They vetoed my election as CEO all 4 times. So I'm out on the street. The board said, John, this isn't going to happen. We've been working on this for months. A new guy came in later and gave them the contract they wanted, and 2 years afterwards, the airline was bankrupt. And so, it was one of the things I said is I just, you'll never give us back what we need back in a downturn. The contract you want could bankrupt the company, and it ended up doing that. But in any event, another article in the paper, I'm out of work. Dave Hanley, the pastor of First Presbyterian, calls me again. And he said, John, hey, I read this article in the paper about you. It looks like you got some free time, and I've got another idea. And I said, now, is this like another direct message from God, or is this just your idea? He said, this is pretty much my idea. You haven't been the one that I've been told to call, but he said, but, it's just timely. I've been doing this a little bit, and I think you would be really skilled at doing this particular job. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, I'd like you to be a bouncer at the homeless shelter in Evanston. And I said, so what does that entail? He said, it's pretty simple. He said, people come in for dinner, and you have dinner with them. You make sure that the guys that are there, a few gals there, clean up the dishes and everything gets put back. It was a different church than the one we went to just across the street. And then he said, people have got to take showers, get cleaned up. There is, if people want to attend it, a Bible study and prayer before people go to bed. And then your biggest job is to make sure that the women and the men don't get together during the night. So you got to stay awake all night to kind of keep track of what's going on. And I said, Dave, I said, this is really, why do you think I would be good at doing this? And he said, I just think that, you could, figure this out and you know how to do it. So I did agree to do it. I only did it 6 times. It was a once a month commitment. And when I started, when I went back to work again, it was just too hard, as you could imagine, to stay up all night and go into work. And they didn't need weekend duty. They had a lot of volunteers on weekends. They needed weeknight duty. This came home to me really strongly about 2 months ago. My daughter, middle daughter, spent nearly a year in Calcutta, India, volunteering for a group called International Justice Mission, which rescues women from sexual slavery. So she'd been working in the slums of Calcutta trying to help repatriate women, if you will, and help them find work and get a job. And if any of you have been to India, it's the hardest experience I've ever had in my life. The poverty is so overwhelming, and there's you talk about the 1%. I don't, but our president does in the country. And if you want to see the divide between rich and poor, go to India, where it's really real. But I think these experiences over the years have just been very helpful to me in my business life, and in keeping grounded and realizing what life is all about, and trying to make sure that I understand what goes on in the lives of the first level of workers or second level of workers in the companies where I've been, and that it's a lot different for me as the leader of a company, and that I had so much to be thankful for. So these different experiences have really been important. So before I close, there was one other scripture I wanted to read to you. This has always been my favorite scripture, and if I can get to Matthew here and find it, And I think particularly for those of us who are type A or double A individuals and who've been in leadership positions in companies, this is a really hard one, I think, for many of us to handle. So I'll just read it to you. It's Jesus speaking, and it'll be familiar to many of you. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, for most of us in the room, we did what we did because we didn't want to wear anyone else's yoke. And I think even though it's Jesus speaking, it's really been difficult for me to be the kind of person who would let him put that yoke on me easily, and I wouldn't chafe with it around my neck or fight back or do things like that. And so what I'm really hoping to do as I go through this transition is to be a good listener, so that maybe God doesn't have to have Dave Hanley speak to me, that I can listen on my own. So I don't know what's in store next for me, but fortunately there wasn't a lot of press about my retirement in the Chicago Tribune, and fortunately David Hanley is in a church in Tennessee right now, and so I don't think he's read that I'm retired, but I'm expecting a phone call from David Hanley any day. So thank you so much.